James Souter was a radar intercept officer on the Phantom. On April 27, 1972, he was on his third deployment to Vietnam. It was his 335th combat mission in a Navy F-4B over Vietnam. I was 31 years old. I was a radar intercept officer with the rank of lieutenant commander, and I had more than 1,000 flight hours in the Phantom. My pilot was a young lieutenant named Al Mallinger. That day, we were assigned as the wing aircraft in a flight led by an experienced pilot. Our mission was to bomb targets near Hanoi, but the weather interfered. Thick cloud cover hung over the entire city, stretching more than 60 miles to the south. So we were redirected to attack a bridge north of the city of Vinh. Under our wings, we carried guided missiles, Sparrow and Sidewinder, and each aircraft also carried 4 cluster bombs. On the way to the target, we destroyed a truck moving north along Highway 1. After arriving at the patrol point, we formed up in combat formation slightly east of the target, at an altitude of 8,000 feet, about 90 miles south of Hanoi. After taking our position, we continued to follow our flight leader. A few minutes later, the air intercept controller contacted us.
Heading 360, distance 85 miles.
Apparently, a single MiG-21 had just taken off from Phu Quien airfield and suddenly appeared on the controller's radar, 85 miles from us.
Roger,
said the pilot, and adjusted our course. At 3,000 feet, there was a solid layer of clouds between us and the MiG. He was below us, and it quickly became clear that we would never see him like this. I glanced at the regional map I always carried with me and started watching the terrain through the front of the cockpit. I said,
"All right, Al. Do you see that lake halfway to the horizon? The one that looks like a finger?"
Al spotted it through a break in the cloud layer. They called it Finger Lake, and we were going to meet the MiG right over it, or just north of it. And it all looked like a trap. I was completely convinced of that, because my mind immediately went back to a scenario I had been thinking about for several months. A situation where MiGs would try to lure us into a fight on their terms. The weather was right. The terrain was right, and the aircraft was right. The F-4B, without a Doppler radar, could not detect a target directly below the aircraft. I understood. The MiG pilot knew we were flying the F-4B. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been reckless enough to come straight at us the way he was doing now. I looked at the map again and realized our path would take us into an area just west of Bai Tuong Airfield. Since my last tour in this region in '67, they had built an operational MiG base there.
Heading 360, distance 75. Heading 360, distance 70, high speed,
the controller reported. The MiG was steadily closing the distance, coming straight at us at 360 knots.
Heading 360, distance 65.
This was definitely the exact MiG intercept scenario I had discussed with a friend just a few months earlier. But in our case, the situation was made worse by our fuel shortage. My intuition told me that not every aircraft was going to make it back to base that day. I started thinking about what I would do if we were shot down. We were still too far from the target area to search for him with our onboard radar, so I had time to think about where we would go if the aircraft was damaged and we couldn't make it to the water, where rescue would most likely pick us up quickly.
Heading 360, distance 60.
I remembered telling our flight leader once that the North Vietnamese Air Force could defeat the radars on our F-4Bs by hiding under the cloud layer and using ground radar interference, just like they had done many times in '66 and '67.
Heading 360, distance 45. Heading 360, distance 40, speed 360.
I remember thinking to myself that the MiG pilot was either a brand new second lieutenant or a brave veteran, because he just kept flying straight toward us, calm and steady, not afraid at all to face 2 Phantoms alone. But he had every possible advantage on his side. He was in friendly skies, over friendly territory, guided by a controller who knew the area perfectly. He was about to intercept us near a well-positioned MiG base, where other fighters could take off and join the fight at any moment. And we were practically announcing our presence with the flashes of our very unfriendly radars.
Heading 360, distance 30.
The moment was approaching when we would have to start searching with our onboard radar. The MiG-21 was a very small aircraft, and on radar it appeared as a tiny blip, so turning the radar on too early would have been completely useless. We stayed at 8,000 feet as I began the search.
Heading 360, distance 25.
I told the pilot to descend to 7,000 feet. We were still in formation, about a mile and a half off the right wing of our flight leader. I was searching for the MiG on the radar, but I couldn't see any contacts. Our leader stayed at 8,000 feet, flying at 420 knots. That was probably the moment when we should have separated from him, but the job of the wingman is to stay in formation with the leader, no matter how bad things are getting.
Heading 360, distance 20.
I kept searching, but I still couldn't see anything.
Heading 360, distance 15.
During our training, we had been taught to watch for the smoke trail. Back in '62, we learned that a jet could smoke like a coal furnace, and we had to use minimum afterburner to reduce that smoke trail. Any pilot knew that a long black trail in the sky was a direct invitation for the enemy. If we hadn't used minimum afterburner, the MiG would have easily spotted our 5-mile smoke trail, approached from below on an offset course, slipped in behind us, and shot us down. Later, it became clear that by that moment, the MiG had already detected us. The right time to switch to minimum afterburner had already passed, and in any case, we didn't have enough fuel left for that anymore. At that moment, our flight was passing over the eastern edge of Bai Tan airfield.
Heading 360, distance 10.
I tried to scan the clouds and the terrain below, but there was too much ground clutter. I knew that trying to spot an aircraft with a surface area of just a few square meters over North Vietnam was almost useless.
Heading 360, distance 4.
I also knew that at around 5 miles, the radar beams could start to merge into a single return, making it even harder to identify a small target. So at 4 miles, I stopped focusing on the radar and looked toward our leader's 6 o'clock, in case the MiG had slipped past our radar. I scanned the area behind him, level, above, and below, exactly as I was supposed to do. I could have called 6 o'clock clear to my leader. I should have called it. That might have prompted him to check my 6 o'clock as well, in case he was no longer watching my tail. But for some reason, I didn't say anything. I kept looking around and started scanning the area behind us, to the right, both above and below. While I was looking back, the controller suddenly called out.
You may have missed him. Check heading 220, 4 miles.
I quickly checked the compass and realized that heading 220 was at our 7 o'clock. And then, bang, a sudden loud noise. No shaking, no vibration, just a loud impact, and the aircraft immediately began to slow down. Apparently, a missile had just hit the aircraft and taken out both engines. I was thrown forward into my straps, the sensation similar to the sudden deceleration when coming out of supersonic speed. I switched the radio to UHF and told the pilot we had been hit.
This is 2. We've been hit. We're losing altitude.
Then, I looked again toward heading 220 to see if our flight leader was under attack from the MiG, but I couldn't see him. Then I looked to the right again and saw a thin, perfectly straight, crystal white exhaust trail from a second air-to-air missile that had just passed under our right wing. My brain had already understood what was happening, but it was hard to accept it. Logically, I knew it had to be an atoll missile, but I still hadn't seen the MiG. My mind refused to accept that after 335 combat missions, after walking away without a scratch every single time, this routine, almost ordinary mission would be the one where a MiG finally got me. I gave the order.
Turn left toward the mountains, Al. What's the status of the engines?
He replied.
The left engine is at 30% power. The throttle is jammed. I can't change it. The right engine is out. The thrust is unstable. It feels like the linkage is gone. It's not responding.
The Phantoms had rear-view mirrors mounted on the metal frame of the cockpit. I had never considered them very useful for spotting aircraft behind us, but now they served a very different purpose. I looked into the mirrors and saw that the entire tail of the aircraft was on fire. Flames were shooting out at least 20 feet to the sides, as far as I could tell, and we were flying at only 250 knots. The aircraft was burning fiercely. I said,
"We've got a hell of a fire, Al, but we're going to keep flying this airplane until it comes apart."
Suddenly, I remembered all the reports about damaged Phantoms. From those reports, I knew the engine was not likely to explode, even if it was burning badly. If it hadn't exploded on impact, then maybe we still had a chance. We needed to fly as far as we could before ejecting, and Al said,
"All right."
Finally, Al started turning, but not to the left. I tried to get him to change course toward the relative safety of the mountains. The mountains were a much better place for helicopter rescue than the flatlands below us and to the east. Helicopters could pick us up in the mountains, but they would never risk flying that far out over the plains, not so close to a MiG base.
"Al, what are you trying to do?"
I asked.
"Trying to make it to the water."
He said. The aircraft was in a 30-degree bank, turning toward a heading of about 030.
"What do the hydraulic gauges say?"
I asked.
0. All of them.
Even if he had tried to change the direction of the turn using the stick, the remaining hydraulic fluid would have drained out, and we would have lost control of the aircraft completely. And then we would have had to eject before reaching the mountains. So we continued the right turn, slowly gliding down at 250 knots. I switched the radar to standby and moved the radar panel aside, preparing for ejection. As we passed through heading 180, Al suddenly said,
"There he is, the MiG." "Where?"
I asked, pulling the radar panel back and starting the search again.
"That son of a bitch got us, but we can still get him. Where is he?"
I looked into the radar scope, but despite the wide search angle, I couldn't find anything.
"Damn, he's outside the scan. There he is, 3 o'clock, moving north."
I looked to the right, trying to see him with my own eyes, but I couldn't. I switched the radar off and slammed the panel down. In another situation, I might have laughed at myself for trying to fight after the fight was already over, but that was exactly what we had been trained to do. Our engine was gone, and we were going down. But we still had electrical power from the generators, and the radar was still working. If the MiG had come into the radar scope, we would have used what little hydraulic pressure we had left to aim and shoot that son of a bitch down. But damn it, we were over his country. He could make it back to his airfield easily. As we kept gliding west, Al said,
"All right, I'm going to release the bank. We're going to roll to the right."
I looked at the left wing. The interceptor was fully up.
"Okay, I've selected your seat."
We had agreed beforehand that I would control the ejection sequence if it ever came to that, so I switched the ejection handle to the both position. That meant when I pulled it, Al would eject with me. The aircraft began to slowly roll to the right. As soon as the altimeter passed 3,000 feet, I tightened my back, grabbed the ejection handle with my right hand, locked my left hand over my right wrist, pulled my elbows in as tight as I could against my sides, and waited for the aircraft to finish the roll. When the aircraft rolled out of the inverted position and started approaching about 45 degrees of bank, I pulled the handle. The canopy blew off, and the rocket seat fired with a violent hiss. Then everything became a blur. It felt like I had done a backward somersault, maybe several, I'm not even sure. And then suddenly, I was hanging under a parachute at about 1,500 feet above the ground. I had always wondered what it would feel like to jump with a parachute, and after the ejection and the canopy opening, I was surprised by how quiet and calm the descent was. I looked up and checked the lines in the canopy. Everything looked fine. It was surprisingly peaceful, a slow, quiet descent. No strong wind, just silence. I remember thinking that if I got out of this mess alive, I would definitely try parachuting again someday. Then I looked down and saw our aircraft, now just a giant ball of fire. I looked to the left and saw Al hanging under his parachute. I took off my helmet and dropped it, then pulled out the survival radio from my vest and called our flight leader.
"This is Bravo 2. I've ejected. I'm okay.
He replied,
Roger, the only thing I can tell you is try to make it to those mountains over there. Roger, we'll try.
I pushed the radio back into my vest while bullets kept snapping past me in the air. Why the MiG pilot chose to hit us instead of our flight leader, I didn't know. But I had 11 months in a prison in Hanoi to think about that.